Hi, I'm Cassie Brooks from Brownsburg, Indiana. I've been a middle school health and physical education teacher for 20 years, and I kind of feel like I'm living my best life in a way. I know it's very corny, but my why is I get to equip kids with the knowledge and skills that will help them to get what they want out of life and really to live their best life. So I'm kind of living the dream in a way. And I truly love what I do. And we're just west of Indianapolis. I'm in kind of a suburban community, growing area. Used to be kind of a sleepy town, and now we're building up. Um, and I love where I am and want to share with you a little bit about how I have developed confidence in my teaching when it comes to sex ed and why it's actually my favorite unit to teach. And a lot of people think I'm crazy, but it really is a lot of fun for me. One more tidbit about me is in 2018, I was Shape America Midwest District Health Teacher of the Year. And that was a really awesome opportunity for me to grow as a professional and just kind of underscored for me the importance of being involved in my state and national organizations because of how much I have grown from other people through all of these learning experiences provided. So thank you, Iowa, for inviting me to share with your teachers. Really excited to share and connect and keep connecting in the future. I'm one of those people who you are not bothering me if you want to ask me questions. I love to share what I do. I love to answer questions. I love to give away all of my stuff. By the way, I will be sharing all of my curriculum with you. So if it's something that you might be interested in, you want to take a look at it, you want to copy paste, take little pieces of it, absolutely by all means do that. And I'm connecting with you as much as you want on social media, especially on Twitter. And let's get started. And you can always reach out to me with any of your questions. So I kind of have a PowerPoint to lead me through what we're doing because that's sort of how I tend to operate when I do presentations. So this is just kind of my basic information if you wanted to grab a snapshot of it so you've got my contact information in the future. In this presentation, I plan to share why I love this unit so much and how I feel confident even in teaching in this area. And that wasn't always the case, but why it's so important, how to get there, and kind of show you what I do, lead you through a little bit of my curriculum, and then I can take questions and discussion. As I mentioned, I'm going to be sharing my resources with you. My unit is called Healthy Choices. That was kind of the school district's name for it. I do have a letter to parents. In Indiana, we're required to have parents opt in now. That's just a recent change in legislation. So I'll share that with you in case you need some ideas. I have a student note packet for them. I find that's a way to hold them accountable so they can't completely zone out. They can't completely just goof off in the time that they have there. They have to stay focused, but I'm not requiring them to spend a ton of time going through details. Also, I share my teacher notes because there's some things that as you're going through, you're going to go, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, or I can't remember, what does that UZ stand for? You'll have my teacher notes on that. And then kind of the deeper lesson in refusal skills that is tied in with the presentation. So as I talked about, my kind of why I teach what I do is because I know that what I do really helps my students have the life that they want. They deserve to have healthy relationships. They deserve to build healthy relationships and maintain their quality of life. We might be the only adult who is comfortable enough. Maybe you're not super comfortable, but probably a little bit more than some adults. I've heard stories of kids who have had a parent find out that maybe a certain process has happened during puberty, and they have literally thrown a book at the child and walked out of the room. I've had students completely shocked as to what is going on with their bodies and had no idea on some of these things, or say, I tried talking to my dad and he yelled at me and walked out. So I might be the only one they can truly come to. I want to be a reliable source of information for them. Um, you'll hear me, anytime you get to talk to me about health ed, you'll hear about skills-based health education. It's really focusing on what are the skills that kids need to get through life, because most of the information, they can look it up later. And some of the information, related to, say, HIV, related to sex ed, that's something that there's going to be development as we go through time. And so what I teach them right now, even if they just memorize that right now, it's going to be out of date in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And so it's really more important that kids have skills such as, how do I speak up for myself? And I can actually practice the appropriate terms, and that way I feel a little bit more comfortable. And I can look at sources of information and determine, is this really valid? Or do I need to find a better source? Being able to communicate with other people about their values and the boundaries that they've set for themselves. Being able to make those decisions about their boundaries and what values matter to them. Analyzing influences even ties in there. So there's so many skills that if I equip students with these, then I feel better sending them out in life, that they're a little bit more prepared for dealing with the situations that they may encounter in their lifetime. And, this stuff is essential, right? We're educated professionals. We can handle this. You've got this. I know it's challenging. I know it's awkward, but I've got some tips to share and I've got some resources to share. I hope this will help you out. First of all, when it comes to overcoming the nerves, a lot of that can be taken care of with really good planning. So first of all, think about what it is that you want your students to walk away with. What skills should they have? What information do they absolutely need that they're not going to get anywhere else? So think about what is the most realistic for you to be able to accomplish in the time that you have. My situation's a little challenging. I have 45 hours with kids during middle school. They get one semester every other day, and they either get it in 7th grade or they get it in 8th grade. That's not a lot of time to cover everything that I feel is important related to self-management of mental health, including their self-care and when to get help and how to communicate, decision-making, goal setting. There's so many things that they need to do in those 45 hours. It's pretty tight. So I don't spend a ton of time on some of the detailed physical things that can be looked up later if they have a question. Kind of do an overview so we have enough common language that we can discuss and have good conversations. But then I really focus on the skill building. Second is talk to your administration. It feels so much better to sit down with the administrator, whether it's building level or district level, whoever it is that you need to kind of okay your curriculum with, and make sure you know where your boundaries are. When I first started out, I had kind of a department head who would tell me, well, you can say this and you can't say that. And I wasn't entirely sure what that meant and why. And so I feel a lot more comfortable now that I've shared my curriculum with our administration. I've gotten clarity on what's acceptable and what's not. That way, kind of like what's safe. I do want to say, however, even being from a fairly conservative community, do your best to be inclusive with your language, with the way that you're talking about relationships. Make sure you're there for all of your kids. You may not be able to provide all of the information that all of your kids want right now. However, you can provide all of them with skills that will help them out in life. But make sure we're not excluding kids by saying, well, a boy and his girlfriend. That might line up with some kids, but it might cause some kids to feel excluded if they're having some confusion in their feelings, or if they're not sure if that doesn't fit with their view of themselves or their friends' relationships. So just be inclusive as you go through this. Also, plan out your discussion questions. I have a whole bunch of them to share with you that are kind of on my slides, and it helps to guide. If the kids know what the questions are going to be, I kind of also will ahead of time anticipate what they might respond. It's middle school. I can't always predict exactly what they're going to say. There's definitely some things that are not what I expected. However, it's a good idea to sort of know what kids might say. What might somebody say when they're serious? What might they say that shows they're very ignorant or not very knowledgeable on this particular topic? And what are some things that kids might say just to throw you off? Kind of anticipate a little bit of that. I'm sure you have plenty of experiences to go on, or ask other teachers. Ask me if you want to, and then kind of think about, how am I going to respond if someone says something like this? If someone asks that question, how am I going to respond? Practice that response if you need to. If you're like, oh my goodness, I have no idea how I'm going to say those words out loud, well, then practice them out loud. I know this sounds really silly, but practice the words out loud. If that means standing in front of a mirror at night, if that means coming in early to your classroom and practicing saying them at an empty classroom, then say those words out loud. Say those responses out loud so you don't fumble as much if you get nervous. But it's okay if you get nervous. Kids are going to giggle. I'm going to giggle, you're going to giggle, and that's okay. You'll have some ground rules that you'll want to set up. I share mine with you here in a few minutes. And just make sure that you let kids know, hey, it's going to be awkward. It's going to feel funny. There's going to be times when I turn red, or you're going to giggle, or you're going to look down and cover your face, and that's okay. It's normal to feel a little awkward about this. And when you acknowledge that awkwardness, it's easier for you to feel awkward and for them to feel awkward. It's safe. Acknowledge it and move on. I'll give you some more pointers for that in a few minutes. If you have a question that you're really thrown off by, I've had questions sometimes from kids where either A, I didn't know the answer, never heard of what they were talking about, and wasn't sure if they're serious or if they're completely just messing with me trying to get a response. Who knows? They're middle school kids. It could be anything. Whether you have younger kids who maybe have gotten more information than you expect them to have, or it's a high school kid trying to rattle you, or it's something that you have never heard of because it's not something that fits with your lifestyle, it's okay. You don't have to have every single answer completely right then at that moment. If you can't think of a way to answer it immediately off your top of your head, if you're not really ready for that, just say, that's a great question. I'm going to have to come back to that one. Let me think about it. Write down their question. Sometimes it's a matter of, it's a question that you're not really sure if it's allowed to be discussed fully based on district or state expectations. In that case, go ahead and write it down. Just say, that's a great question. I'm not sure how you want to address that yet. I'll come back and answer that next time. And if I don't, make sure to remind me, because I'm pretty terrible sometimes about remembering what class asked me. But oftentimes I'll write down period 4, purple day, so that I know that's the class that I need to address that with. Or sometimes it's something that, hey, one person asked in one class, but that's a really good topic for everybody. So my classes, I kind of talked about 7th or 8th grade. They're every other day for a semester. So I get about 45 hours with the kids. And I have a lot of kids each semester. I also teach PE. So it's a lot of kids that are coming through, but I'm so excited. They all get me. I'm the only one at my school that does the health education, and I really pride myself in it, that the kids that come through our school are prepared for their life. The documents that I'm going to be providing to you today, just to reiterate, the student packet that they're going to, that I kind of old school, I print it, they take notes on it. The teacher notes that I've prepared ahead of time with kind of my answers. I always have that kind of as a cheat sheet to remind me of the things that I want to say. And then the presentation slides that I use with them, which is in the form of a PowerPoint. Of course, you could take whatever you want and convert it to anything that you might use online, or if you're a Google Slides kind of a person, however you want to do this. And then also my parent letter. So I'm going to go through kind of the introduction to the unit and the 5 different lessons that I do. I actually go over about 7, sometimes 8 days on those different lessons, but I sort of break them down into those 5. You'll kind of understand in a minute. The very last day, I do anonymous questions, so we'll get to that, and I'll explain how we go about doing the anonymous questions, because you don't want to just wing it with that one, or you could end up getting yourself into a little bit of a sticky situation. But I'll kind of go through my guidelines for that. And then there's a letter to friend assessment if you would choose to do something like that. So my lessons, I've got 5 of them, like I said. The first 3 are really the specific detail kind of stuff. It's more the content information, the functional knowledge. Not all of it is something that we're going to go into deep detail on. However, some of it, I'm going to use that term. We're going to talk about ovaries. So you need to know what the ovaries are, at least have that diagram that's labeled, and we can go back and you can kind of go, oh yeah, that's what that, okay, now I remember. Just enough functional knowledge so that we can help kids figure out what they need to, and then start working on lessons 4 and 5 are more about skills. Coming up with what are their influences, what are their personal choices, how do they make those decisions, what are healthy relationships and what aren't healthy relationships, and how do they go about developing their plan and coming up with ways to communicate their feelings about it. So we're going to see a change in format here as I move through the PowerPoint. And it's because the different format with the white background and the blue on it is my student slide presentation. So here we are. This is on the screen the first day that my kids come in for sex ed. I can't get away from calling it sex ed. That's what they know it to be. That's what their parents ask, or have you had your sex ed lessons yet? So I just acknowledge it. But we do call it healthy choices. I put this up on the screen to start it off with a little bit of a giggle. Let them know it's okay to be lighthearted. We don't split our classes anymore. In my classes, we're in middle school. They're big kids now. I want them to act maturely, and we'll kind of go into detail about what that means. So they see this as they're coming in. They can kind of walk in, get settled, kind of the big eyes start, and they kind of start whispering to each other, oh my gosh, did you see what we're doing? And it's kind of funny. But then at least it's up there on the screen, and they can see right away it's okay to giggle. So they can all kind of take a deep breath and realize it's going to be okay. I do wait until later on in the semester to start this topic if possible. The reason I do that is so that kids can develop a relationship with me and with each other and know that this is a safe place. It's a learning experience. It's okay to not know the answer. It's okay to feel awkward. It's okay to mess up. It's a learning process. And so it's okay to not be perfect. I go through these ground rules as soon as class start and ask the students to act as young adults, be respectful to me, be respectful to their classmates. And that's going to be many of the same things that they usually know. You've got to be a good listener. You shouldn't be whispering to your neighbor. In fact, during this particular unit, I asked them to have zero, and I mean zero, side conversations. The reason that I say no side conversations is because they tend to be either inappropriate side conversations where they're talking about someone else or what they heard about someone else or something that they heard or something that's not true. And it just gets into an awkward thing. I suggest to them that if they have a side conversation, whether it's whispering to a neighbor or it's turning and talking to someone or it's signaling to someone will notice and people will make assumptions. Don't open yourself up to an assumption about why you're looking at or talking to or making a look at a certain person at a certain time in the curriculum. That's probably not going to be pretty. Also, some students have been called down to our principal's office to have to explain what it was they said because someone overheard something they said. Now, if it happens in my controlled classroom conversations, I'm able to manage what is allowed to be said and what's not allowed to be said. If they're having a side conversation about contraceptive devices that's not in our approved curriculum, that could be an issue for me. Of course, I don't give them that specific example, but I just say, if you're discussing anything that's outside of our approved curriculum, that could be a problem for me. And it could be something that has a lot of, you're not necessarily going to get in trouble, but it could result in you having to speak for why it was that you said this to that person at that time. And that might be an awkward conversation to have with your parents and or administrators. So just be cautious. I also ask them to kind of raise their hand to speak, not to just blurt things out, just again, so that we can make sure everybody has the chance to hear what's being said, be respectful, the same old stuff that we generally do. But in this case, it's a little bit more important that we manage what is being said and how and where, and that I hear everything that they want to say. I do ask that they protect people's identity, not naming names. So if it's their cousin who got pregnant when she was 15, we don't all need to know it was your cousin. If you have a question about teen pregnancy, you can say, I know someone who was pregnant when she was 15 years old. How does her body handle that compared to someone who's in her 20s? That's a valid question. It's not okay to just be telling people stories. Respect people's privacy. Just talk about someone I know, and only if we really need to know about that person's situation. Otherwise, just reframe your question into a question and not a story. I let the kids know it's okay to giggle quietly, but everyone feels a little bit differently when it comes to these topics. Some people are super comfortable. Their parents talk about it at home. They can have a conversation with their siblings or their friends and not blink an eye, but not everybody's in that situation. A lot of kids have been told, shh, keep that quiet. Don't talk about that. Cover that up. Don't you dare. We're not going to talk about that here. And so it's a little bit more awkward because it's something that you normally don't talk about in the open. So you're going to see some things, you're going to hear some things, you're going to think some things that make you feel a little bit awkward, and that's okay. That's perfectly normal. I let them know that. I acknowledge that. What's not okay is to make people feel more awkward. Don't add to the discomfort. Don't make someone embarrassed by going, dude, that's you. That's not appropriate. Of course, I say that jokingly to kind of let them know that that kind of thing would be inappropriate, but it also lets them know it's okay to be a little bit lighthearted here. Of course, I wouldn't want them saying that. That would not be acceptable. If I tell them if they have questions that they're not sure if it's appropriate. So these are the questions that they might be going, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that word. Or I heard a slang term on the bus, but I don't know what it means. I always tell them, just write it down and ask me later, whether it's while you guys are working on something quietly, or if it's before or after class, I'd be glad to answer it. But if you were to ask a question with a word that's not really school appropriate, that would be awkward and uncomfortable. So please just write it down and then ask me later. I do tell them there are some things that I'm not allowed to answer because they're not really appropriate. It's not deemed appropriate by the school board for this particular level class. That means that I might not be answering every single question they have, but those answers are out there. They might have to ask their parent or doctor or find another valid and reliable source of information, which in my class they've already learned how to do because we're skills-based, and that was the first skill that we worked on in the class. I can always give them suggestions of where to look. So those are my ground rules. I make sure to share why my students are learning this so they realize this is not just someone says they have to, so they've got to do it, but they can realize this is actually going to help them out. So they're not asking a question that they think is a perfectly normal question, but everyone else is thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe you don't know that. And it just kind of helps them to reduce awkwardness later on in their life. So we get into day one. So they have their packets, tell them, go ahead and write down your name, copy down the quote of the day, take a deep breath, and there's their quote. I need to know how my body works so I can take care of it. Simple, easy, light, not that big of a deal. So it starts out kind of simple. By the way, on my packets, I make sure there are no diagrams right on the front page or right on the back of any reproductive parts. That might be a little bit awkward if a kid were to say, drop that in the hallway, or they're going through their binder at night and their parent sees it. At least they just have like definitions and things on the first page. I do show the kids, even though this is not in their particular packet, I show them the endocrine system and talk about the role of hormones, which have been brought up before in class. We've talked about some of the different ones. And I just want them to understand that hormones, sexual hormones, like other hormones, are not something that we go, I think I want to increase my hormones right now. I think I should be doing more and less of this, or I want to put off my hormones and wait till later. Well, they kind of happen automatically. And I want students to understand that. But then I also want them to realize that we still have control over our actions. So that's kind of a for later. I do go through and review puberty changes because some kids may not have had as much background information depending on which elementary school my students attended or what information they've received previously. So this is just a basic overview review. We don't go into it. I just put it on there for them to see. So day one, we do continue, I don't have them in my slides, but we go through a diagram of the female system, the male system, and kind of like overview of the processes. So we trace the path of the sperm cell from production to release. We trace the path of the egg cell from production into the uterus, where it could or could not be fertilized, and what happens if. We go through the menstrual cycle. All of that is in day one. So it's just basic, like this is how the reproductive processes work. We get into day two, the next class. Sometimes I have a lot of questions from students on reproductive processes, especially more in my 7th grade, because they haven't had as much science class yet. So they're going to have more questions on day one, and it might even take part of day two to finish up day one's lesson and get into day two. On day two, we kind of focus on pregnancy and parenting, really, but there's a little bit of a review on conception. We do mention birth. I don't really go into those a whole lot, and let kids know, hey, when it's time that in your life, if you choose to have children or you're involved with someone who's going through this process, you'll have access to information, and there are even classes for expecting parents to teach them everything they know. You don't need to know it all right now. We're going to do the basic overview. We kind of focus on While pregnancy is a pretty amazing process, there's so much that happens through it. It's not a whole lot compared to all that parenting stuff. So I asked them on their page, they have 4 goals for life that they would like to accomplish that would be more challenging if they had a child while they were a teen. And they then have to think about academics, sports, relationships, social time, making money. These are all things that are going to be a lot more difficult if I have a child at the same time. So that kind of buys them a little time and gets them thinking a little bit more internally about how this might affect them. I do in this presentation share with you the video that we use, basically because it is short and sweet. It kind of breaks down what I think kids need to know, but it gets to the point. It doesn't go through an actual birth process. I do share with them that it is kind of a British accent, so some of my students aren't expecting that. And then I have an old textbook. I don't use textbooks anymore, but I do every once in a while pull out the old ones to show them some of the things in there so they can kind of see a timeline of pregnancy. Then when we get on to day 3, we get into sexually transmitted infections. Of course, I do share with them that that's kind of an updated term, that many of their parents will refer to it as STDs or diseases. And this is just about, hey, you've got to know there are some things that might be a possibility because of participating in sexual activity. So we go into the details. I want them on their bell ringer, after they copy their quote of the day, they have to answer this question: where would you go for reliable information? And then they kind of share, they write a few things down, they share with their friends. What do you think? Well, I don't know if I would ask that person. And then I share with them some of the resources that I would recommend them going to, that are valid and reliable sources. These are the ones that my school district felt better about. Obviously, there's plenty of additional sources that are more comprehensive, and I do keep kind of a resource list for students. So if they were to ask me, like, do you have anything that talks about gender identity? Yeah, I do. This is a site that I would recommend. And then I can give it to them, but it's not something that every student needs. And so it's not something I'm going to provide to everyone. And that's at the direction of my district. Then, of course, we talk about some not so good sources of information. Just be careful, guys. That's always fun. When I go through the main particular sexually transmitted infections, of course, we're going to go through the viruses, we're going to go through the bacterias, and have the kids actually identify which are which. So they have a chart that they'll fill out, and we share which ones are sometimes don't have symptoms and consequences long term and treatments and things like that. And then there's a few that aren't on like my basic chart that I want to spend a little bit more time going over. First one being HIV/AIDS. And so this is the information that I provide to them. Keep it fairly simple at this level. And I try to not put too many facts and statistics in there because that's going to be something that's outdated pretty soon. But I always have some additional resource slides that are not in here where we can actually look at the current statistics and what developments are going on right now. The next one is pubic lice, and this is the only pictures of STIs that I actually show to students, because I don't want to I don't want to gross kids out. I don't want it to be a scare tactic thing. I just want to give them the information, and this is something that they might, wait, what does that look like? Well, I don't understand. Was that the same thing as head lice? And so I show them, this is head lice versus pubic lice. You guys have probably had incidents in, growing up where you maybe have encountered head lice in a classroom or at your daycare, or, somebody had it that you slept over at their house and then you found out and whatever. So anyway, it kind of shows. And the joke of the day is, so You see why they might call them crabs? And the kids are like, oh, it's so funny. A really funny story about when my principal was in my classroom and doing an evaluation on me and sitting in the back of my classroom when I pulled this up, and she about died of embarrassment. It was kind of funny. But anyway, so I show those to the kids and can answer their questions. And then I also have trick on there because it's not in um, the chart that I had to show them initially. Okay, couple more things, and then I will get to kind of wrapping up. So that's all the detail stuff, the content. Now we get into the relationships part of it. So this is where I ask students to start thinking about where they are in their relationships right now. A lot of family and friends, and then maybe they even have some thoughts about different people that are kind of more special, and give them the opportunity to think about how those relationships will change as they get older. And so this is kind of an introduction to what relationships should and should not look like. That can relate to all different kinds of relationships, but it will help them as they start to think about dating relationships in the future, what those might look like. Their bell ringer, I have them write ways that they can show respect to others, how they want people to show respect to them. And it starts getting them thinking about what it is that they can do to show respect, because that's something that a lot of people don't automatically expect in relationships, and they need to. We do during this unit kind of look at what are some consequences that could possibly come from sex before a lifetime commitment. And so I kind of review, these are things that we've kind of been through. Definitely the physical they've already been through. Social consequences, we start going into what those are. And of course, just like any good teacher, I'm going to have the kids involved in discussions. Well, what are some concerns that teens might have if they are getting involved sexually with their dating partner? And maybe people talk, then what? And so kids can kind of talk about what might happen, what are some potential issues that they might have to deal with if sex is something that's shared before a lifetime commitment. Mental and emotional, obviously, it's going to vary from person to person, what's embarrassing, what is upsetting to them, what causes them pain for much of their life. That's going to be different from for every person. And so these are just potential consequences that kids might want to think about. And then, of course, in Indiana, I'm required to focus on abstinence is the healthiest choice until marriage. And so we, of course, have to go into, this is kind of like your 100% guarantee that you can avoid some of these negative consequences as if you wait until marriage. We go into stages of relationships, and these are just kind of a quick explanation of different stages. I have the kids write down a couple notes just to sort of understand, okay, so is that just a relationship based on infatuation, or is there some commitment there? Well, how do you know they love you? And so it really kind of gets into getting them to think about, what really do I want in a relationship? How do I know that I have that in a relationship? And when am I really going to be sure of that? I do a tape demonstration that I took from someone else. I don't actually do this with the students anymore because I don't want any angry parents, but I do show it on myself. I just use like floor tape from the gym. I've seen duct tape used, no thank you. And you kind of put it on an arm to show this is some serious bonding power. If we think of sex in a relationship as something that truly is your most private, personal part of who you are, and then you're sharing that with another person, where normally you have to keep everything covered up, quiet, don't talk about that, that's not for sharing, and now you're choosing to share that with someone, that's a powerful bond that can be developed. And there's a lot of potential there. And that stick right on your arm, I mean, that could really cause people to be very, very close together and stay close together. However, when people choose to get into that bond before they really have commitment in their relationship, and especially before lifetime commitment, they may find that that relationship doesn't stay together. And in fact, if you think about it, if you've shared that part of your body with someone, if you share the most personal part of you with someone, that might be really a little bit emotional if you see them talking to someone else and wonder, is this person committed to you? Or if there's a disagreement, it becomes a bigger emotional issue because you're thinking, I shared the most personal, intimate part of me, and now you're acting like this. I, there's a lot of additional issues that might come up in a relationship. So, what if that relationship doesn't last forever? And you start peeling it away, or you rip it off and break up. Does that happen in some young relationships? Absolutely, it does. And the problem that we have is, one, that's very painful. And that can leave a lasting pain or lingering pain in some people. And then that bond, that power that you had to hold you together, when it's torn away, then the next time that you go to share that bond with someone, it's still going to stick. But what are you bringing with you? You're bringing memories, because they can see my arm hair that's on the tape. You're bringing some memories of that previous breakup into your new relationship. And so the kids take a few notes, just write down, what does that mean to you? Sex can actually lose its stick when it's shared with multiple people. That's a little bit controversial, but that's kind of how my school board said they wanted me to address it. Sex too soon in a relationship definitely can lead to greater pain if a relationship breaks up. So that's something I want them to think about. It's not just a thing you do, but that could be very emotionally painful if it doesn't work out. And saving that only for sharing with their lifetime partner is a powerful bonding gift, because that bond is never shared with anyone else, and it can be really powerful for their lifetime. We go through relationships on all kinds of levels, and tell them, as you're starting to think about romantic relationships, it's important to understand how they can be similar and different from other relationships, and what is healthy. Focusing on communication and seeking counsel from trusted people in their lives, not just trying to handle it on their own. Of course, I don't go through this so quickly with my students. We get into what is abuse, the different kinds of abuse, and then some signs of unhealthy relationships. And we kind of get into, while it may seem really sweet that they're texting you constantly and they want to know where you are and if you're okay and who you're with and why are you going there and why are you hanging out with them and how come you're not with me and can't you spend time with me? Can't you hang out with me and study your family? Can't you make up an excuse to leave? Can't you come over? That might seem very sweet and loving, but it can actually be kind of a warning sign. And so kind of gets kids thinking, and there's some different ways that I go through this, but this is just the basic information that they're getting. We get into what healthy relationships look like, and to report it if we suspect it, and that there's different help options available. Then this is the last thing that we do on the day 4 lesson, which is their exit ticket for the day is a question. They have to write something. So everybody has a slip of paper. Everyone has to write something. Either they write a question or they write something they learned. That way, nobody knows who's asking what questions. And it all goes into a bucket. As they leave class, they just toss it into the bucket and they walk off. And I can get a chance to screen all of those questions. I just bundle them up with a rubber band or a paper clip, and then I can look through them and then get back to them the next time. That way I'm not reading 5 of the same question over and over again. I can kind of pare them down. I tell them I don't answer how-to questions because this is more of a how not to class, and I don't answer personal questions because that would be inappropriate. So I give them kind of ideas and say, if you don't have a question, write something that you learned. And I do get some really good questions, really thoughtful questions out of this. Then we get into day 5, and it's about their plan. This is more for them to figure out. If you look through my teacher notes, you'll get a complete explanation of these steps of affection and what that means. We kind of get into, as we get more affectionate, by the way, that's holding hands, hugging, kissing, over the clothes, not over the counter, the underwear zone, and sexual intercourse. And that those are increasing steps of physically showing someone your special feelings for them, but those increase those hormones, those physical, not within your mental control signals that tell your body, hey, go ahead and have a baby because you're ready to. And I ask the kids, just because you can, does that really mean that you should? Are you ready for a baby yet? Probably not. So if you're not ready for pregnancy, if you're not ready for the different consequences that could come to you if you were to engage in sexual activity that you don't feel ready for, then you still have that responsibility to control your actions. And that relates to the other person too. So let's think about it in a different hormone situation. If I am standing around the corner from a friend, or a friend is standing around the corner from me, and I come walking along and they jump out from behind that corner and they yell, boom! And I didn't expect it coming. I'm going to have a hormone called adrenaline. Of course, they know this already. That's going to put me into fight or flight mode. My body is right now instantly ready to either fight or run away. Now, if I'm just at school and my friend is just messing with me, I don't really need to fight and I don't really need to run away. But my body still gets ready to fight or run away. That's hormones. But just because my body got me ready for it doesn't mean I have to act on it. If I hit and push and shove and scream and fight and fight and fight and attack, then I'm probably not justified in my actions, because I have this amazing thing called a brain that is capable of higher function and decision making. And as soon as I go, oh, it's just my stupid friend, I might say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that to me. And I might be a little frustrated, but I'm not going to fight them, and I'm not going to run home from school because they freaked me out a little bit. My body gets ready for those things, but that doesn't mean I have to act on them. Similarly, sexual hormones tell you, hey, go ahead. This is how you reproduce. And they will tell you to go for things that maybe you're not ready for. You still have the responsibility to control your actions. So it's not, just like it's not fair to say, well, he scared me, so I beat him until his nose was broken. That's not okay. Or, so I ran home. No, you still have to control your actions. If you allow your hormones to get riled up, they will tell you, go for it, keep going. But it is your responsibility to go, wait, no, just because that's what I feel like doing, just because my body's getting ready for that, doesn't mean that I actually have to do it. And then I ask the kids, where are you going to draw your line? So when it comes to those steps of affection, where did they draw their line personally? Where are they comfortable? Where are they okay with the consequences? Then we get into those lines. Where is pregnancy introduced? Okay, obviously it's going to take sexual intercourse before pregnancy can become a possibility. So if you don't want to become pregnant yet, then you need to draw your line before that. Where do STIs become a possibility? Well, when you go into the underwear zone. Okay, so then you have to draw your line further back from there. Social emotional consequences. That's going to vary for everybody. Some people would be embarrassed if their parents ever found out that they kissed somebody, well, then maybe you're not ready to cross that line yet. So you draw your line wherever you're comfortable. And again, it's an individual choice. We go through a tug of war. If I know where my line is on the floor, and you can do this however interactive you want, then I want to make sure that as I draw that line, I know where that line is. I'm not just going, hey, I hope I don't lose this tug of war. I know exactly what I need to do. I know where my line is, and I'm not going to cross it. I also can be more successful in that tug of war where I may be feeling a little pulled toward that line or over that line. It might help to get support. It might help to hang around friends and talk to people who share my values and want the same thing for me, and tell them about my challenge, and hang out with people who also stay on this side of the line and want me to stay on the same side of the line. It helps to have a partner who's on the same side of the line. Then there's not as much pressure to get across that line. And stand your ground. Don't run up to the line every single time and then hope, oops, I fell over the line. Doesn't happen. You want to make sure that you stay back and approach with caution so that you don't get pulled over, whether it's hormones or it's your partner, that you don't end up, oops, going across a line. You need to talk with your partner about where your line is, because it's not fair if they don't know. Discussion questions that we get into, we look at what should a date look like. They actually have a homework assignment with that. We get into the ways to say no, and I give them some different examples. And this is a review from when we did ways to say no with other risky things like alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. We get into consent. The only thing that means yes is yes. And if you don't hear a yes, you have to ask. And we get into how kind and respectful it is to ask for consent. Is it okay if I hold your hand while we're out in public? Yes. That may seem a little bit silly to some, but it's so respectful, and it lets a person know your feelings matter to me. It's not about me being in control. It's not about me doing what I want to do and moving to where I want to be. So we do get into consent. I share there's so many different things to do in dating relationships to show someone that they're special without having sex. We get into what specifically a refusal response should look like versus not so much. It should be assertive. It should focus on the behavior. Name a consequence. There's the ABC. Actually take them through. Help me. I give them an example, then they help me write an effective refusal response to touching that somebody isn't ready for. Then in groups, they write a potentially risky scenario, then they rotate, they respond to another group scenario with a refusal, then they rotate again, they evaluate another group's refusal and provide feedback, and then they go back to their initial response, and they have to they have to read their feedback and extend or rewrite theirs. So this is part of how I structure the writing the refusal situation or the scenario where there's a risk behavior involved. It could relate to sex, it could be related to something else. So we get into that, they go through, and then the exit ticket for that day is refusal responses, what makes them the most effective, and kind of the impact, the tie-in. At the end of the unit, I ask students, just kind of for my purposes, to look at what did you learn about yourself during this unit. I might have them turn that in. I might just have them write that for themselves. Letter to a friend is something that you can do for an assessment if you want to have something that clearly shows to you that kids understand some of the different consequences that can come if someone is engaging in sexual activity before the commitment of a lifetime relationship. And so you can kind of look at that. So I've shared with you a lot of my tips. I've shared with you some of the things that I do in class, some of the information. I didn't share with you the student packet, but I will in all of my resources. So you can kind of see what they're going through, and also you'll see my teacher notes and the things that I kind of try and refer back to. Um, so things that we might discuss on Twitter, here's some ideas, and I am more than up for any conversation that you might want to have with me, or feel free to email me, so I'll come back to that. If you have any questions for me, I'm really easy to access, and I love to answer questions and help people because I'm in this journey too, and I really love it. I feel passionate about it, so I want you to feel just as good about that same experience. Thanks again for Iowa asking me to be a part of this conference and to share what I know. I'm really excited about the opportunity to grow together. Take care.